Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today we are going to be making some sketches using these oil pastels, which is not something I use very often, so this was kind of just creating for fun. I don't usually use pastels very often, but every so often when I feel a little bit bored of art and like I have no ideas, I will bring out my oil pastels and doodle with them for a little bit. So that's what I did on this day. I had also made a couple of illustrations using Tombow dual brush pens and pencils, and while those are one of my favorite ways to create, sometimes I feel like it goes too well and the process is too easy, which I don't know if that even really makes sense, but sometimes my art feels like I really have to focus and put a lot of effort in, and then sometimes it feels like, wow, that was really fast, how am I done already? And this was definitely one of the days where it felt like everything went really fast. So after some of my marker and pencil illustrations, I thought I would practice with oil pastels a little bit more, and I used this black sketchbook, which I actually accidentally ordered. I was expecting one with tan pages, but I ended up using this for supplies that I don't use very often. Since pastels are so thick, I figured the colors would show up really well on this paper, and they did, and I ended up really liking the way that the colors look on the black background. I started with something really simple and kind of a go-to for me when I'm not really sure what to draw, which was just some simple florals and greenery. Those were very simple, had kind of nice textures but nothing too exciting, and I really liked how the lighter bluish color looked, so I thought I would make something oceany and ended up deciding on this little crab. And I'm sorry to those of you guys who don't like crabs. He doesn't have much detail, so hopefully that makes him not look too creepy. Even though I knew the other colors had shown up well, I was still a little bit surprised at how well some of these colors showed up with the crab. Sometimes I have a hard time with the colors smudging and blending when I didn't really want them to. For example, here when I put the black for his eyes, it showed up really well against the red, so I was a little bit surprised by that, but also it was kind of nice. I think mostly using pastels on a larger scale would work a little bit better because I've mostly used them in a sketchbook so far, and I don't really like the amount of detail or lack of that I can get with them. So while I was looking at this crab and watching this video back to edit this video, I was thinking I might make some larger pieces with ocean creatures. So maybe I'll have to spend some more time slowly making a few of my favorite ocean creatures using pastels on canvas panels. I do think it could be a lot of fun, and I think the textures that the oil pastels create could definitely work really well for ocean creatures, just because it's kind of soft and easily blendable, but you can still have distinct lines and textures in them as well. For this next part, I switched over to a sketchbook from the same company but in a different size. I actually saw one of these at a local art event called Art in the Park, and I had tried to order one and accidentally got the black square version that I was using earlier, and then later I got the one that I meant to. So this is the Dilutions Creative Journal, I believe it's called. It's from Michaels and it is a 9 by 12 inch. They have really thick paper and are great for using any sort of random materials that maybe you don't use as often and are too intense for most paper to handle. So some of the things that I like to use in this are acrylic ink, alcohol markers, paint markers, things like that. The alcohol markers can sometimes still bleed through the page, so I still have a little piece of paper that I'll put in between the pages if I'm going to use alcohol markers. That's the kind of thing that I use in here, and I don't usually share these sketchbooks because they're just kind of where I have fun and try new things without thinking about how it'll turn out, and instead I just enjoy creating in new ways or with different items. So I don't usually share them. I think I've shared maybe 1 or 2 pictures of them before. I made a dragon out of paint markers in one of them, and I think I used some gel pens and things like that. So these aren't really something I make posts of. Sometimes I'll just share them to my stories. But that's what these sketchbooks are, and I really like their paper. The artist that I saw that had one at that art event last year was using it as a art journal. She used it for kind of like art therapy, I guess you could say, and just having whatever thoughts and feelings that you needed to get out, but using color and texture and that sort of thing instead of just writing. And it looked really cool, and I liked how she used so many different supplies in it, and I thought that'd be a great sketchbook to get because I like to use a lot of different supplies, but not all of my notebooks can handle all of them. So this one that can handle basically anything that you throw at it is really nice, and it's really convenient to have such thick paper in a bound book instead of just individual pages. Anyway, back to the art. For this sketch, I wanted to make a little mountain town, but since I don't use these as often and I'm not as familiar with their colors, sometimes I would start to use a color and it wasn't quite what I expected, so I kind of had to figure out what other colors to use to get things back on track, I guess you could say. And that kind of happened with the mountains. I didn't expect the brown to be quite as red as it was, but then after I used a couple other colors with it, I ended up liking the way that it turned out. And I really like how the textures look using oil pastels when they're not very blended, and it's a little bit more streaky and you can really see the lines. But then as the colors start to blend a little bit, that looks really nice too. This is one of those mediums where I feel like I am kind of just seeing what happens as I go along, and I think working from light to dark worked pretty well with the mountains, and I liked the way that they turned out, but at the time I was not paying enough attention to how I was using the pastels, so I don't think I continued doing that for the town. And I probably could have added one more layer of light gray or white on the top of the mountains if I wanted to add more of a snowy look, but I did like the dark textures that it had at this point. I would probably try harder to work from top to bottom next time because drawing in the sky after the mountains were already there meant that I had to hold my hand a little weirdly to keep it from smudging the mountains, and it definitely would be easier if I started with the sky and worked down the page, but again, I wasn't really paying attention to that when I was first making this, and these are kind of things that I noticed afterwards. Since there was not really a plan for this or a sketch, some of the order I worked in didn't really make sense, but again, the sketchbook is just kind of for having fun and trying new things. I ended up using a bunch of color for this because I wanted it to feel kind of like a fairy tale town with bright colored shops and cute little buildings and all that sort of thing. Once I tried to include so many things, it was kind of hard to draw the details. And this is a bigger paper than the other sketchbook that I was using earlier, but I think it still could definitely be better as a larger piece on a canvas with fewer buildings and fewer overall details, and maybe focusing more on the town and the shop instead of the mountain and scenery. The main plan with the town was to have the right side be more normal colored buildings and kind of like they're on the edge of town where they're sort of first what people see. And then as you work across towards the left, there's the more cute and fancy buildings, so there's different colors in there. And I did try to keep the buildings that are the same color kind of spread out from each other. Of course, that wasn't anything super strict, and I wasn't too worried about it, but also just keeping in mind that I wanted them sort of scattered. And since I didn't plan this out at all, I did put in the buildings first, and then afterwards figured out where the roads would be around the buildings. And you can kind of see me doing a little bit of that here and trying to figure out maybe where roads would go or different things like that. And then I got a little bit distracted because I thought this would be a nice yellowish color for some bright golden buildings. And really, with no plan, made whatever sounded like it would be fun at the moment. And sometimes that was very chaotic. Like you see on this one, I changed the colors several times, but it was a lot of fun to just kind of see what happened and fill in random spaces with different colors and then go back later to try to make the details of those buildings. This is kind of similar to one of my watercolor paintings that I made sometime last year. I made a bookmark with a little mountain town and really bright colored buildings, and I used glitter watercolor on there. I was kind of thinking of that a little bit while I was working on this, but I also didn't have it in front of me as a reference. So I was just thinking kind of the bright sparkly colors and then how I could do something similar using oil pastels. Obviously I don't have glitter in my oil pastels, but using brighter colors to add some textures. And then here you see me using, this is a really dark brown, it kind of looks black on the camera, to add in some outlines and windows, doors, roofs, all of those sort of things. But I did switch between a few colors for this just because I didn't want them to all look the exact same. So a few of them I added details using yellow for different roofs and windows, and really just tried to mix things up and make it really bright and colorful. And if I wasn't using pastels, I think I would have added a lot more details and little buildings to this town. But because it is pastels, I couldn't really make that small or detailed of things, so I just kind of left the buildings like this for now. I'm not really sure why I left this little section of grass for the end, but for some reason that's how it worked out. And I think I was considering putting flowers in here and then decided not to, because at this point I had been drawing for quite a while and was kind of getting bored of it a little bit. So I kind of just ended things here, but I do think this could be fun to, again, come back to on a larger scale and include fewer buildings and maybe just spend a little bit more time making those details. But that's pretty much all for this video. I know it's pretty simple and there's not a whole lot going on, but that was just a little simple day of sketching with oil pastels. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.